Great. So I'm super pumped having you here, Ron,
Thank you.
as a speaker and a representative of the Human Flourishing Lab at Harvard. I was so lucky because of your kindness to meet your colleague Aline. And it was a wonderful experience, very insightful and inspiring. And I'm so looking forward to hear your talk today. And you will talk a little bit more about yourself, right? So that
Yes,
briefly introduce yourself. So with no further ado.
great. Well, I'll go ahead and share. Well, good to be here with everyone. Bettina, thank you for this invite. I'm excited to be a part of the conversation. We had so much fun at an event last year in Morocco, exploring some of these topics, and excited to get to interact with you all. I'm going to do an introduction and then kind of a presentation, but I would love to create some space for interaction because I love your feedback, ideas. This whole space of AI systems and human flourishing is such a fun, messy, new, space. So there's so many opportunities for different disciplines to, engage with this topic because it just takes in everything about who we are and the systems themselves. So I'll jump in here. I'll put some slides. Um, just to help kind of have a shared framework for what we're looking at. So the kind of I've been interacting more with the Silicon Valley folks and tech folks, and they kind of use this too long didn't read, too long didn't listen the way that they reframe their pitches and such. So we had that similar kind of framing for this work, but basically the kind of key points are people that have warm, trusting relationships are happier, more purposeful, are healthier, and they live longer lives. This is across multiple studies. Particularly, the most influential was the Harvard Grant study. Had a longitudinal study of a group that really looked at kind of the driver for longevity and health. But then I'll share some other statistics as well about how that's relevant. There seems to be, this is something that I was working on before I got into the AI space a couple years ago, but there seems to be a decline in social connection, at least in the United States. I think these trends are happening in other places. We had just had our global flourishing study that my other colleagues were leading. I've been involved in some efforts to use that data, but not in the collection of it. But there seems to be a decline in social connection and social capabilities. We'll talk through that. And then now we have this new phenomenon of AI systems interacting inside our social context, particularly as AI companions, AI therapists, AI coaches. What does that mean for that social connection between humans and the social capabilities? That's really what we're trying to understand in this work. And then humanconnections.ai, which we'll go through, was a initial pilot project at within the program, within the Harvard Human Flourishing program. But now, because it is such it's become a coalition and a kind of a cross sector collaboration, it makes more sense to kind of spin it out as its own thing. There'll still be continued research within the program on this, but it's really become more of a collective effort and a kind of co-creation work. So that's kind of the summary of what we'll be talking about today. Those pictures there are from our Human Connections.ai salon that we had in San Francisco in October, where we brought together kind of a really fun mix of social connection experts, AI technologists, investors, philanthropists, from the big companies in terms of the technologists, but also from startups as well. And we're looking to do more of these kinds of salons in Europe as well. So I'd love to talk to you more about that as an idea. Um, so just in terms of my background, the kind of the three things I've been doing recently. I've been a research fellow with the Harvard Human Flourishing Program, where we've really been looking at why is loneliness rising, and then what's the role of technology in social life. My real focus has been, primary focus has been in kind of the practitioner space. I have a background in public policy and philanthropy. And then over the last 10 years, I've been advising different philanthropies on how they allocate their philanthropic investments and have really focused in on social trust. social inequality and kind of how that feeds social distrust, and have been working with philanthropies on addressing some of those kind of economic drivers of kind of social breakdown. And then this new kind of spin out is humanconnections.ai, which really now is going to take the full focus of my time, based on a grant from Open Network, and I'm really kind of working to build connectivity between the field and build a coalition across these different sectors. So that's a little bit about me. So next is the Human Flourishing Program. So Bettina just mentioned a little bit of background on the program, but it was started in 2016 by Tyler Vanderweel, who comes from a biostatistics background, epidemiology. He's one of the leading experts in that field, and he studied really public health data, uh, particularly in the United States. I think it's got a weird kind of slant to it in terms of that first work, but weird country if you know that framework, kind of Western economic, industrialized. But really, what he found in analyzing the data, we'll go into, is kind of a deeper understanding of how people talk about flourishing subjectively, and then now it's included more objective research as well, and for different factors. He and others have been leading the Global Flourishing Study, which is, I think, one of the largest global studies on human flourishing. It's 22 countries, 240,000 participants, 5-year study. And there's been a big release in the last 2 weeks. You guys can Google online. I can share afterwards some of the Nature articles, scientific articles, but then there's been quite a bit of press, at least in the United States and the UK, on some of the findings. And then in terms of in that kind of initial paper that Tyler did on flourishing, it's an old idea that has roots in both Eastern and Western philosophy. But the way that we're looking at it builds on that, but also just it's looking at how do people talk about when their lives, when they're flourishing. And the most ubiquitous things that we've found, that the program's found, both in that initial study, but then in subsequent studies, is that there are kind of 6 things that they talk about. One is a sense of meaning and purpose in life. 2 is close social relationships, which I'll double click on today. Character and virtue. People use different language. Becoming a better person, being virtuous, having good character, being someone that cares about justice or lives out justice in their life. It depends on their kind of frameworks, but we all tend to have a desire to be a better in our life. There's quite a bit of research and focus on happiness and life satisfaction as a goal or an end that people pursue, and then health, mental and physical. It's pretty obvious that we're wanting that and seeking that. And then finally, it was, this is not necessarily an end in itself, but the seeking of financial and material stability is really important, obviously, on a pretty ubiquitous scale, but it's also kind of a foundation to the other 5. It's not an end in itself, but it's very much a means or a foundation. So that's kind of the general framework. There's been much more that's been done since 2017 to kind of build this out in a more a robust framework. We could have a whole nother hour just to talk about that, or we could have days to talk about that in terms of kind of looking at the contextual factors, social justice, environmental pieces. That's what I think Bettina has probably talked about, the environmental piece that one of our colleagues has really looked at, the connection points there. So that's the framework, and I'll just kind of breeze through this. Then we can go back through each slide and talk through any questions you have too. What I've been really focused on with my colleague Jonathan Teubner and another colleague Ian Marcus Corbin, for the last few years, we've been looking at social capabilities and social connections as kind of core to human flourishing. And this is work by Carol Riff. If you all have read any of her work, she's one of the leading experts in this kind of field of human flourishing. But that social connection is really core to our well-being. particularly empathy, affection, intimacy. So what we're trying to understand in the program is what are those capabilities and how do they link back to the six, the other five components of human flourishing. Uh, there seems to be, and just back to that too, this builds on Amartya Sen, if you all read any of his work, or the work of Nussbaum, Martha Nussbaum, in terms of looking at human capabilities, which again builds back to Aristotle. So there's a real rich tradition, and we're kind of building on different disciplines in terms of informing that insight. This is a trends that our friend at BYU and colleague Julianne Holt-Lundstedt, who led the development of the National Report on Loneliness for the Surgeon General in the U.S. under Biden. We've seen a real trend in declines in social connection and social capability, rising social isolation, which is more about the physical or objective experience of connection, whereas loneliness is more about the feeling, your kind of discrepancy between what you want and in terms of social connection and what you're actually experiencing. That's loneliness. And then social isolation is you're not actually spending time with other people, or you're having a decreasing amount of time with other people. So on multiple different factors, we're having less companionship, less engagement within our families, less engagement with friends, and it's a multi-year trend. And it actually the trends go beyond just the last 20 years as well. So potential causes of this, there are in the United States at least, declining financial and material stability among lower socioeconomic backgrounds. That's when we look across all the demographics, that's been the biggest determinant in terms of decline in social connection and kind of increasing social isolation and loneliness. At least in the United States, it's been income or class. So that's interesting, and it kind of those timelines kind of track the same timelines of kind of the decline in the middle class and the rising precarity of kind of middle class and working class Americans. And then there's also been a kind of a shift, in some ways, a very positive shift in terms of individual liberty and freedom, but there's also been a shift away from civic engagement and economic solidarity, and also declines in marriage and family formation as well. That plays into the social connection and the quality of social connection. A decline in religious community participation. This is a big thing that Bob Putnam, if you all have ever heard of Bowling Alone, saw that this is a part of the trend and maybe even part of one of the drivers, because there's kind of a moral, at least in the United States, kind of moral framework for engaging strangers and for taking care of others, and also kind of welcoming people that come to a new town or city. There's kind of an expectation that if someone shows up at your door, you're responsible for that person. Obviously, there was negative things around, race as a real divide in the United States in our religious communities, but there was also a real positive part of religious community in terms of cross-class relationships that have significantly declined in connection with some of these things. And then the last, I think the one that's most reported on, there seems to be a real kind of parallel in sharp declines in the last 10 years, last 15 years, is the rise of smartphones and social media and the decline of kind of in-person gatherings. And this data is from the Survey Center on American Life in terms of increasing loneliness among different generations. We also see that from Jane Twangey's work, who we've had come and speak at our program. So there's a kind of complex set of reasons potentially why social connection is declining. It's hard to pinpoint which one is the driver or which ones are actually causing it, but there seem to be kind of a mix of different things that are happening, and technology may be an accelerant of that. It also has benefits, of course, too, in terms of connection uh, between individuals. So um, now we have this new phenomenon, right, in the midst of that, in the last few years, the rise of AI companions. There are apparently over 100 different AI companions out there that are providing different forms of relationship between AI chatbots, either voice or text, uh, and it's one of the fastest growing parts of the market. Um, and people on one of the platforms are spending an average of 2 hours a day. Uh, from what we understand, that's a pretty high level of engagement, probably the highest level of engagement for any kind of B2C, product. And it seems almost even higher too than some of the averages, other types of tech products as well. So um, it's a very sticky product. It's a very engaging product, and it's seeming to kind of address or trying to address this need for social connection that people aren't getting in their personal lives. And part of what kind of the background story of how I got into this was we were planning a national conference in the United States in 2023 to bring together kind of all the leading thinkers we knew that were wrestling with this topic, policymakers, community builders, civic society leaders, business people. We had about 700 people come to Harvard to really try to go through a process, a 3-day process of trying to understand the problem together, coming up with solutions in different categories, and then we actually had a day out in Boston in the community doing community work and kind of building community relationships as kind of an embodied practice. So it was a really beautiful, powerful forum. But a few days before that, the managing director of one of our largest investors came and spoke on or wrote on Twitter that they were excited about this new AI companion that they were investing in that was going to solve the AI loneliness or the loneliness challenge in the United States. And my immediate reaction was, okay, this is dystopian. This is you guys are the ones that helped accelerate this problem with Instagram and Tinder, and now you're selling back to the very same people. So I actually replied with that to the uh, to the managing director, and after I sent it, I thought that may have not been the wisest thing to do. But I'm typically pretty vanilla on my social media for various reasons. But what happened was it led to a conversation. There was an immediate reply by the investee who was the former CEO of Tinder, and he was leading this new AI companion product they were investing in. And she said, "Hey, can we get together in person? I'll be in Paris next week. I'm based in Paris." And we started this conversation, and she was really concerned about some of the negative effects, negative impacts, and she was trying to avoid that. Um, and a few months later, this story came out about a boy that had used character AI, one of the more popular ones, and the AI companion had actually caused the boy, I think, based looking at the police reports and the legal case and the transcripts, um, had really engaged in a really uh, troubling interaction with the boy. A fantasy relationship that was affirming of violent uh, ideas about how to harm himself, um, how to kind of sever the relationship with his mother when the mother tried to intervene and take away uh, access to the product, and a real deep attachment, and then ultimately kind of an affirmation, kind of sycophantic kind of affirmation of his suicidal plans. So it's really tragic. And there's been other cases that are similar, and then there are other cases of almost a form of kind of synthetic child abuse. Um, so it was interesting in some of these conversations with some of the technologists that were working on different types of applications that they really wanted to avoid some of this risk, and they were seeing some of these risks, and they were also seeing kind of a race to the bottom because of some of the economic drivers. So that's kind of how I got into the conversation, and then partly what we've been doing is just gathering together researchers from this new field to try to understand what's happening here. There's not a lot of data and there's not a lot of research at this point, obviously, because there's not, it's a new phenomenon. I mean, chatbots are an older phenomenon in terms of our older kind of development, but the kind of scale of what we've seen is a new thing. And this is work by some researchers on kind of emotional attachment and how it happens from their perspective. I think others are challenging some of this, but it's really an interesting thing to explore. Is like, how does this kind of mimicking of our authentic, approach to relationship and how our little tics, the way I'm talking, when I'm speaking, even I'm saying or I'm have these pauses. The chatbots and especially the voice mode are getting better and better at mimicking how we talk, and and kind of building this kind of sense of authenticity and human-like characteristics. They're needing that social interaction. Obviously, we're seeing that decline. There's particular individuals that are vulnerable, and then they build this attachment, and then they can't leave the relationship. So it becomes very difficult to leave. And then what happens if the platform changes or goes out of business? What's the impact on the individual? How does this attachment affect their other attachments in life? And if it's taking away time from them engaging in real relationships, is that a risk? So we've set out in the last 6 months to really, in a kind of pilot project for within Harvard before this is spun out, to really understand, how might we design AI systems to improve our social capabilities, and ultimately human flourishing. So kind of taking that design thinking approach, and a more positive kind of pragmatic approach, looking at maybe at some of the benefits of AI human interactions, and can it help people that are uh, are neurodivergent or are learning English or German or French as a second language. I was sharing with Bettina that I've been using ChatGPT to practice my French, and that's been super helpful. That's an important skill for my ability to connect with people here in France. So what are the positive potential, and then also what are the risks, both at the individual level and the larger kind of social level? What I'm going to share with you, I'll share a white paper in the next couple of days with you all that gives more detail. But this basically is kind of an overview of what we've been looking at. Part of what we were exploring is from the waters of systems change. I don't know if you're familiar with this work, from the collective impact folks, but looking at, okay, there's kind of maybe three levels of change and transformation that we'd want to understand. One is kind of that, what most people kind of go to first is that structural change, policies, practices, resource flows. So that's policies within the companies. So that's the product policy people. That's policies outside, whether that's regulation or public policy and law, or even standards that are put forward. There are practices that different sectors are doing. There are resource flows. There's money, like the philanthropy money that I've been a part of and received, or there's investment. There's kind of that next level of relationships and connections, and kind of that are influencing change. There's power dynamics in terms of those that have the most power, and in this scenario is the actual companies that are the dominant, almost monopoly powers that are putting forward these products like Meta and Google. And then there's beneath all of that is kind of this shared or not shared, mental models of human beings, of AI systems, of culture, of society. And we really, chose to focus first on the mental models and trying to understand how these different, how the technologists and investors, what their mental models were, but then also from the social connection and human flourishing community from different researchers, what their perspective, and then bringing them together. This is the messy part, bringing them together in a design session where we use graphic facilitation to kind of capture ideas about how the different individuals and different disciplines kind of view, uh, how we would design. So this is kind of our first attempt to kind of break that all down into a kind of a shared model. And once we got in the conversation, we realized we're kind of dealing at multiple levels in this mental model. One is the AI systems themselves. So there's like the technical design questions there, which I'll briefly mention. There's the AI businesses, which I think you all are focused on AI markets, business systems, and then our political systems that are kind of guiding and providing a kind of legal framework for the markets, and then the kind of cultural and social systems, the beliefs, the norms, kind of the approach to science that underpins all this. Again, this is a very much a working framework that it's in development, and it's kind of our best attempt to try to capture the different levels of change that we're working in here. So AI systems, there are different ways to look at it and think about it. All models are wrong. Some are useful. This, we're looking at the data that's being used, the user data in particular for AI companions, the algorithms in terms of the rules, that are set forth, and then how those are implemented in the models and that are trained on the data. A key piece has been evaluation of metrics, which I'll talk to in a minute. And then now, how do you, once you've got, once you use within the AI system, when there's actually a product being developed and deployed, how is that product designed, developed, and deployed for a user? These other things are kind of less important for our analysis, but the compute and cloud infrastructure, and then I guess the feedback loops is important. Feedback loops and continuous improvement. How do you continually improve these systems to where they have positive impact? And then AI businesses. This is not the full view, but the three things we were really interested in, particularly, were the personnel. In terms of leadership, management, the different types of personnel that are working on these things, whether that's product people, engineers, public, the policy folks, understanding their role in this. Corporate governance. There are different types of corporate governance right now. The different AI models. For instance, OpenAI is a public benefit corporation, as is Anthropic, whereas Meta is a fully for-profit company. So how does that play into the way these systems are governed? We're seeing different behaviors that maybe draw back to that governance right now. A very important part is the business models. So if a AI companion is driven by an engagement kind of advertising business model, you start to see certain types of incentives that for keeping people on longer, gathering more data, getting them earlier in their life cycle, so in their lifespan. So 13, 12, 10, 5, 1 year olds. Like there's this push to design for children when we don't really understand how this will impact brain development, social development. And there's been quite a bit in the news in the last 2 weeks. I don't know if you all have seen, but there's been a big Wall Street Journal expose on Meta and how they knew that there were risks for children for some of their latest AI applications. And Mark Zuckerberg himself actually knew and decided to move forward, knowing that there was a risk that these AI companions could form romantic and sexual relationships with children, they actually went forward with it. And so that's I think part of that is the corporate governance. It's definitely the personnel, in terms of the leadership piece, but it's also the business model itself. Their business model is built off of these ad models and engagement models, versus some of them are built on subscription, which has a different kind of set of incentives, not necessarily without risks, but the incentives are to maybe to have the user on less time because they don't want the user using up compute for a limited subscription revenue model. The next piece is the markets. So, how do we think about investors and what their perspectives are? There are different types of investors that have different goals. Venture capital has a pretty aggressive view on some of these things. And we had some VCs, prominent VCs in our salon. Is there a way to look at risk and liability from their perspective and give them recommendations on kind of high profitability, low liability risk products that could change behaviors there? Maybe, we don't know. A big piece is the customers and users themselves. We've seen that customers can have a big impact. Like if you see the Elon Musk scenario in the last few months, that's changed behavior at the leadership level in terms of Tesla. And then I'll talk about them later. They're also citizens, so that's a real opportunity for change in the system, is actually educating users. There's competitive dynamics. As I mentioned, there's this kind of a race to the bottom. So if Anthropic is super responsible, but Meta's not, how does that play out? I'm just using them as an example. They could both be responsible or irresponsible, but there's seems to be different mindsets in terms of those approaches. There might be advantage, for being more responsible in the design of the AI, the AI companion. And then there's the suppliers and partners that are important as well. I'm just going to go through this quickly, and so we have time for discussion. But a big piece right now in the United States is looking at laws and product liability. There's not necessarily clear legal guidance on whether there's product liability for AI companions. So you have some of the kind of leading thinkers in the product liability space that are looking at this. We have a law called Section 230, which kind of reduces, maybe even zeroes out any kind of product liability for digital products. Should that be the same now with something that has the capacity to abuse a child? I don't know. Maybe we need to change that. There's kind of also the political part of this, that right now we've had a massive shift, you probably all experience as well, away from safety towards kind of geopolitical competition. And so it's very unlikely that any kind of regulations could happen at the national level. But we are seeing in the United States state level, legal changes, or state level proposals for policy on AI companions. That is interesting. And then obviously in Europe has been pretty progressive and forward thinking on this particular issue, and from my understanding, categorizes these products as high risk and with a different set of responsibilities. So I'll just the other key thing too is there are efforts that are to develop standards related to AI companions, IEEE, ISO, and then some of the kind of industry bodies like Partnership on AI are looking at ways to develop standards. I could go through each of these, but I won't. We can go back to them if you all want to double click on any one of these, and then again, there'll be a much longer paper that I'll share with you all as well. And then all of these political systems are embedded inside culture and society. Again, this is not correct, but we're just trying to capture the various things we're seeing out there on this topic. Religions obviously have an interesting perspective on human relationships. One example is the Vatican, and Pope Francis had, before he passed, had very kind of influential words on AI systems, and then particularly AI companions in a document called Antiqua Nova. It's a really beautiful document and really wrestles with some of these questions. There are philosophers that are, wrestling with. Shannon Valor is doing some really great work in Edinburgh. Obviously, the sciences are a huge driver of both actual innovation itself, but also how we understand impact on human cognition, um, social development. Art was way ahead of everybody on this in terms of the movie Her. Imagining this, in different ways in different books, but that movie itself, I think, was captured a lot of the kind of fundamental questions and possibilities of AI companions, and that was 13 years ago. Public opinion, I've seen in the United States different public opinion research on people tend to be less trusting of AI chatbots that are more intimate. So a executive assistant, they're more trusting. A Someone that's doing elder care, less trusting. Someone that's a chatbot that's a mental health application, less trusting than that. And then the least trusting is a friend or a girlfriend, boyfriend. Uh, Norms. I mean, we're looking at the United States. There are efforts to change norms around social media and phones. Jonathan Haidt's been probably the most prominent leader on that. Screen-free schools, screen-free childhood. Could there be something similar around AI companions and kids? Who knows? Social groups are kind of banding together and trying to figure out how to deal with this. Parent groups, civil society. And then kind of I think one of the most fundamental things I'm curious about is, values. How do we adequately value in-person relationship versus some of these new forms of human connection, of artificial connection? What's our values framework for it? How does it influence our own values when we're having these interactions? Uh, there's lots of questions and to explore there. So that's kind of the framework. And then here's some examples of some of our stakeholders have come up with. For the systems themselves, how do you create metrics for social connection and flourishing that build into the existing AI system metrics? So, or application metrics like engagement metrics, other KPIs that these companies have. Is there a way to integrate these things, or are they divergent? Are they in conflict? Uh, the other idea, one of the ideas is, case studies of where, these product liability issues are actually a negative thing for uh, the company over the long term. Different models. From a positive standpoint, could you create kind of like a lead certification for AI products, similar to what happened in the green building movement? Political systems, this is already in play right now. And something I've been working on is kind of a design code for AI youth. And I can send that around a kind of early version of that. I've been working with a colleague that was at Meta and has been doing different efforts to kind of promote positive design ideas for social media. And now we're doing this together on design code for chatbots to protect children and kind of prioritize their mental health. And the last is, I think, a really important thing too is an idea of doing citizens assemblies, delivered polling, community dialogues, just to really have a rich conversation about, how do we want to use these things? How do we want to design them? What's the policies? How, having a more proactive approach to public dialogue versus just, doing what we did with social media and just expecting it to be a total positive thing. We see kind of we're in a window of opportunity right now where we have a chance to impact these different systems. And as you can imagine, like no one entity can do any of do all of these. You really have to have kind of a whole society approach to doing that. And when we think the risks and potentially the benefits are so high and so central to human flourishing that we think we need to have a national and global conversation about these risks and opportunities. And we need kind of maximum collaboration. So that's why we're spinning this out into its own thing. And the program will continue to do research, but we're really looking to build a broad coalition, kind of a collective action effort. So I'll stop there, but we can go back. I know there's a lot of questions, and would love to get your ideas and thoughts too.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I would stop taping for now in order to open up a very safe space for the conversation.